Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome on Youth Matters on a fresh episode with me, your host, Sakina Habib. So, on today's program, we will be discussing some important highlights related to the navigating geopolitics and the relevance to the Middle East today. As you know, that a lot has been happening in the headlines lately. There's a lot of spark that's been going on, especially when it comes to Palestine and the global action that we've been witnessing lately, as well as to understand how the misperceptions relating to two world wars and the bloody revolutions in Russia and China have shaped our institutional thinking today as well. More than that, we are going to be discussing about how Trump's administration or how Trump's win has made an impact today on the Middle Eastern conflicts as well in the world. And just to give a very quick highlight about how last week Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faced potential arrest in the UK due to an International Criminal Court ICC warrant for alleged war crimes in Gaza. And although the ICC issued warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, citing crimes against humanity and war crimes related to the blockade and attacks on civilians during the ongoing conflict, the UK government has stated it will fulfill its legal obligations regarding the warrant. However, this still remains unclear. So, moving on to today's discussion, we will be delving into a lot of these key areas, hopefully with our esteemed guests who have joined me on today's program. I would like to welcome Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who is a very well-known historian, author, and a political analyst. I also have with us Sister Sakina Datu, who is a journalist and a producer and a broadcaster. And I also have with me Clive Menzies, who is an economical analyst as well, and who blogs at outersight.org. So without much further ado, I would like to welcome all our esteemed guests on board. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for joining me on Youth Matters. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
So moving on to our discussion today, I would like to begin with the main highlight, which took place a couple of weeks back. This is, of course, it's still very fresh, and we can see the impact that it's been having on around the world and in the Middle East. I would like to start off with Dr. Marcus first. That, in your opinion, what do you think? What does Trump's win mean for the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Well, it is important for me to say, first of all, that in the context of American domestic affairs and British domestic affairs, I am very happy that Donald Trump won the election. Why? Because Trump is anti-woke, because Trump opposes men being in women's spaces, such as changing rooms and toilets. Trump wants to end the attacks on Christianity and restore Christianity to the central position which it has occupied for hundreds of years in America. Trump opposes open borders. Trump opposes mass immigration. Trump favors the deportation of illegal immigrants in America. And also, Trump is very well aware that the whole COVID narrative and the whole climate change narrative is a falsehood, and a terrible falsehood. On top of that, Trump wants to put American industry first and American jobs first. Why is that important for me, a British person? Because any changes in the system in America will have an impact in Britain. The British people are so desperate that we will take something, anything, because in Britain we get nothing, literally nothing. We have seen the British national identity torn apart by the British ruling elite. So if Trump can make a gash, a deep gash, to the throat of the globalists, then that will be felt in Britain. And I will be extremely happy, as the overwhelming majority of the British people will be. Now, turning to foreign policy, this is where I will be very critical of the Trump administration, because when it comes to Israel, there will be no change in American foreign policy. It doesn't matter who is sitting in the White House. It doesn't matter if the Republicans are in power or the Democrats are in power. Both parties, the whole American establishment is fervently pro Israel. And there are numerous reasons which account for that. One of them being, of course, is the sheer influence and power that the Israel lobby wields in Washington, which is something that is extremely dangerous. Now, that said, this is just a personal opinion now. Whilst Trump will be extremely supportive of the Israelis, at the same time, he doesn't want to be associated with wars. That is one of the main reasons he was elected by the American people, and elected so decisively. The American people, like the British people, are fed up of Western wars of intervention. They are fed up of Western coups. They are fed up of sanctions. So it could be, and I emphasize, it could be possible that whilst in public, Trump will support the Israelis, and of course, he will ensure a flow of political, economic, and military assistance to the Israelis. It could be in private. He says to Netanyahu that this war has gone on long enough, and I don't want to be tarnished by it. Furthermore, whilst Netanyahu and Trump historically have close relations with one another, all is not well between the two. Donald Trump is someone who doesn't forgive and doesn't forget. So after the Democrats stole the election in 2020, who was the first foreign leader in the world to telephone Biden and congratulate him? Benjamin Netanyahu. So again, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Israel, there will be no change in American foreign policy. However, we are all very well aware that Trump's approach to Russia is far better than Biden, than Clinton, than Bush, etc., etc. And also, the way that Trump diffused tension between America and North Korea was, in my opinion, the most outstanding feature of his foreign policy when he was president. And again, we will see the Americans under Trump attempting to defuse tension between Washington and Pyongyang, which has emerged because of the Biden administration.
Okay, so I will move on to Sister Sakina Datu. Sister Sakina, as you've heard Dr. Marcus's comments on this, he also said that, okay, Trump does support Israel, but then he will not start any war, right, to tarnish. What do you think? What is your opinion about this? What does Trump's win mean for the US and Middle Eastern economy? And do you agree with what Dr. Marcus has said?
I completely disagree with Dr. Marcus on almost all of his points. To start with, when he talks about Donald Trump restoring Christianity in the US, we know that the form of Christianity that exists in the US at the moment, especially the one which is in cohort with Israel, this is not the Christianity that is accepted globally. These are those who are, extremists who believe in Israel being a part of a promised land. So the kind of Christianity that Trump supports, it brings it's worrisome, I think, and it should be worrisome for all Christians around the world, including, of course, all people of the book, because at the end of the day, we believe in the unity of the people of the book, and believe that we all have similar principles, that we are just being divided by people like Trump. On his aspect of him being anti-war is just a rhetoric, I think, that he is put out there. We have to remember that during his first term, his first presidency, Donald Trump was the one under whom the war by Saudi Arabia, the proxy war, Saudi Arabia on Yemen, happened. He was the one who almost brought the West on the brink of war with Iran after assassinating General Qasem Soleimani. So I think it's a miscalculation. It's a rhetoric, and people believe in it. He is not at all anti-war. What Trump is, the way he wants to work around this is he does not want to put American troops in line of danger, because he understands that the Americans do not have the appetite for it. So he will not be putting his own troops on the ground. However, he will be conducting, for example, he will give carte blanche to the Israelis to continue, not only continue, but intensify, their bombings around the Middle East. Not just that, he is also anti-China. He is anti-Europe, in my view, too. So when it comes to the issue of Ukraine, yes, he wants to bring peace in Ukraine, but we have to understand, what will peace look like. At the end of the day, it will be left to Europe to solve a lot of problems. He wants the Europeans, and he has said it very clearly, to continue providing assistance to Ukraine, and US will not be providing that assistance to Ukraine anymore. For his benefit of the US has actually went and bombed, in Germany, the pipeline which was bringing gas and oil, and now Europe is forced to buy oil from America, which is obviously to their advantage. In my view, Europe, with continuing to support America and following their lead, they are putting our own continent in jeopardy. So I don't see a single point. He is, of course, not to mention that he is an he's anti-women, and that he is a convicted felon. So really, in my view, I do not see any positivity in the election of Donald Trump.
Okay, I will get back to that again. Dr. Marcus, I know that you want to comment on this, but I will first like to move on to Clive here, and then I will proceed to you so that you can refute Sister Sakina's argument. Clive, thank you so much for joining. And my question to you with regards to, again, Trump's win, if you can add to both the perspectives that we've had from our guests, that what do you also think about Trump's win? What does it mean for the US and Middle Eastern economy? As well as if you can delve into how the misperceptions relating to the two world wars and the bloody revolutions in Russia and China have shaped our institutional thinking today, and how does this work with this whole Trump administration ideology?
Certainly. Well, firstly on Trump, as I've often said, politics is theatre, and the trajectory that has been followed probably for centuries, but certainly within the current millennium, since 2021, has been consistent, irrespective of who is in power. All of the ills that we are discussing today have been fermented over this period and continued irrespective of whether it was a Democrat or Republican in office. So Trump is a showman. He's a very divisive showman. He's quite unpredictable. And I think if anything, he will aggravate the situation in the Middle East rather than improve it, but that's not to say it wouldn't have been aggravated anyway under Kamala Harris. So I think what we need to do is to go back. The advantage of going back to the beginning of the 20th century is that you can begin to see the trajectory quite clearly, and we have testimony and documentary evidence which is much fresher than if we go back further. But this structure dates back to 458 BC and has evolved over centuries, and it's involved other revolutions, the English Revolution, the French Revolution, and revolutions through the 19th century, most of which didn't actually come to fruition, but there were many attempts at revolution in Germany. So if we take the beginning of the 20th century, there was, in the aftermath of the Boer War, where many of the ills that came into being later were actually fermented then. And Anglo-American power was very much a feature of creating the conditions for the First World War. Germany was not the perpetrator of either war, but in the case of the First World War, it was manipulated and maneuvered by secret agreements between Russia, Britain, France, and Belgium into war. And that war was horrendous. It cut swathes through the primary youth of Europe at the time. And that was the objective, because this is all driven by an ideology of destruction, which basically forms around the idea that there are a relatively small number of people who are chosen to rule the world, and they have created the conditions by which they can do that. And so the First World War was, if you like, one of the major salvos that we can point to of this decimation of European culture and European nationhood. And that's not to say that they were necessarily perfect, but they were certainly, in some sense, serving the interests of their people. We then, in the midst of the war, had the Balfour Declaration, which was extracted from Britain as a repayment for encouraging and ensuring through media and other means, politics, that America entered the First World War, prolonging a war that could have actually stopped a lot sooner. And then in the aftermath of that war, the Versailles Treaty basically impoverished Germany, and its country was totally decimated. And Marcus referred to woke. There was a fair amount of wokeism in Weimar Germany. In addition, we had the Russian Revolution, which was funded by Wall Street bankers, and the same ideology was driving it. And it was primarily a revolution, not of the Russian people, but of a sect within the Russian population who managed to take over the reins of power by stealth. And we can't go into detail as to that. So in that first couple of decades of the 20th century, the scene was set for what came later. In the aftermath of the First World War, Germany was decimated. It had suffered huge deprivation economically. Its resources were stolen. And in that background, Hitler came to power and began to actually rebuild Germany as a force. And that was not to be tolerated. And in fact, there was world Jewry actually declared war on Germany in 1933, and the British started building bomber command expressly to bomb Germany. So they were planning for a war. And what Hitler was doing was trying to protect those former German territories that contained German-speaking people being victimized, much as the Russian-speaking Ukrainians have been in recent years. And so he was attempting to rebuild a national identity, if you like, and culture. And that was a lot of what was talked about in terms of the way he was operating. this was totally misrepresented, and the primary obstacle to people's understanding is the notion that 6 million Jews were massacred via the Holocaust. And there is no documentary or physical or chemical evidence to suggest that. And there is, in fact, documentary evidence to the contrary from the Red Cross and internal sources within the British government that actually acknowledged that this was not the case. But this is a linchpin, if you like, to this whole atmosphere of tyranny that has evolved over subsequent decades. And the truth does not need laws to protect it. And yet, across many European countries, it is illegal to even question the Holocaust. And many people have paid a very heavy price for doing so. So here we are in a position where Israel, because of the myth of the Holocaust, has a very exceptional position. There is no veracity in the claim that the Israelis, most of whom are Khazarian, are returning under God's will. And I'm not a theologian, so I won't go into that in great depth. But this is a land grab to create yet another fiefdom, because Israel was given to the Rothschilds as a personal gift, and it is theirs. They own and control it. And the plan, as articulated by the Yinon Plan in 1982, and prior to that by Kalergi, basically they're planning for a greater Israel, and at the same time to destroy European culture, European nationhood, in order to dominate the world. And that is manifest also in the current conflict in Ukraine, which we won't go into. So the combination of the two world wars and the Russian Revolution, and to which we must add the Cultural Revolution in China, because in the world of geopolitics, everybody has this notion that Russia, China, and the West are, if you like, opposing forces. And cosmetically they are, and maybe in some respects they might be in reality, but they are all controlled by the same forces, because money controls everything. And we'll come on to how that might manifest itself in BRICS a bit later, perhaps. And so
Yes,
we have this idea that there is enmity between Russia, China, and the West, and that these are in some way unconnected, the forces that are controlling them. And it's essentially, George Orwell wrote in 1984 that one of the ways to keep the population subdued and compliant is continuous threats of war or other external forces. And perpetual war is one of the ways of controlling domestic populations. So there are many layers to this, and it is quite complex. But in essence, what we're witnessing is the death throes of a structure. And before I finish, I must emphasize that this is not necessarily about individuals and personalities. This is about a structure. We live in a world that contains institutional structures, and each of those structures is populated by people very much like you and I, irrespective of our ideological differences. We all want the same thing. We want a decent life, we want comfort, we want to look after our families. But the structure within which we are operating is working actively the whole time. So people are encouraged, incentivized to submerge their humanity, if you like, and act in a way that harms their fellow man. And there are penalties for those who act altruistically for the benefit of their fellow men and women, because they are clearly an obstacle. And this is the world that we live in. So in terms of what's going on at the moment, and this is something that we've anticipated, that after about 2019, maybe, we knew that this world of chaos was coming. And that's what we're in the middle of. We're in a transition in which this old order is beginning to collapse. And the wars and conflict and the madness that we are experiencing is a manifestation of a system in its death throes. But there is hope, because there are many, many people who are beginning to awaken to the reality and recognizing that these institutions, and national institutions, global institutions, are not there to serve our interests. In fact, the opposite is true. And so they are forming alternative structures. And at the same time, with the advent of the internet, we have the ability to organize ourselves very differently from the way we have it hitherto. And I won't go into the evolution of how we handle value from money to data and something quite different. But we are in the midst of a paradigm shift, and all of that we are discussing in detail is connected, and it is a manifestation of this transition.
Okay, thank you so much, Clive. Now I would like to move on to Dr. Marcus. Dr. Marcus, as you know, earlier on, Sister Sakina had put out a couple of points that were in disagreement to what you had proposed. Can you refute to that? And also, you did mention that how Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have a great relation between them. However, it didn't take long for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to welcome Donald Trump's re-election, describing it as the greatest comeback in history. And his far-right coalition ministers like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir tweeted their excitement even before the election was officially called. Now, some analysts, have called Netanyahu's relationship with Trump, who is often described as unpredictable, as complex. So, what would you make of this?
Donald Trump is not a savior, and I will not withdraw one word of criticism which I have made about him, be it today or be it when he was president of America. However, he is not part of the political establishment in America. He is not part of the family which rules, not governs, which rules America. Now, let me refute some of the unsubstantiated and peculiar comments made about Trump from the other guests. Claims which, quite frankly, amount to peddling the propaganda of the American establishment. Firstly, how on earth is Trump anti-women? It is Donald Trump who says that men should not be allowed in women's sporting competitions. Men should not be allowed in women's toilets. Men should not be allowed in women's changing rooms, and so on and so on. It is Donald Trump who says that there are only two genders, that a woman cannot have a penis, that a man cannot have a cervix, that a man cannot be pregnant. It is Trump who is defending the female identity. It is Trump who is defending women's rights. Secondly, the other claim, which again amounts to peddling the propaganda of the American establishment, is that Trump is a criminal. Well, those charges brought against him were politically motivated, and they were brought against him by the American establishment because he is not part of the family. And I'll tell you who the criminals are: Bill Clinton, George Bush Jr., Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. How many deaths have those vile men caused in the world? Indeed, how many deaths has Hillary Clinton caused in the world as well? They are the ones who are the criminals. They are the ones who should be in prison for the rest of their lives. And I mean a proper prison, not a prison like you find in modern day Britain. Thirdly, the claim that there is only one brand of Christianity in America, again, is unsubstantiated nonsense. There are many evangelicals who confuse biblical Israel with Zionist Israel. That is extremely frustrating and angers me. But there are a lot of evangelicals who do not like Israel. Furthermore, there are many other Christian denominations in America. Moving on, it was Trump who condemned the BLM violence in 2020, which included the physical attacks on churches and throwing out of windows of Bibles. Where were the Democrats to condemn that? They were nowhere to be seen. Also, the horrific Saudi war against the people of Yemen did not begin under Donald Trump. It began in early 2015 under Obama. Yes, Donald Trump continued the support to Saudi Arabia. I criticize that. I will keep on criticizing him for that, like I will keep on criticizing him for his support of Israel. But as I said at the beginning of this discussion, I will take something, anything. He is anti-woke. That the cancerous woke ideology is a terrible threat to men, to women, to children, to mankind. We don't see any attempts in Britain at halting woke ideology, nothing whatsoever. In regard to Netanyahu, I, of course, am not privy to the exact mechanics, the exact dimensions between that relationship between Trump and Netanyahu. Do I expect any tension between the two men to impact American foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel? No, I don't, because the American establishment is always going to be fervently pro-Israel, and that is a major problem. But that is one thing which is extremely concerning. But at the same time, does Donald Trump really want a war with Iran? Well, if he wanted a war with Iran, there would have been one during his presidency. Of course he doesn't like the Iranians. Of course he doesn't like the Iranian Revolution. Which American politician does? But he does understand that a war between America and Iran would be catastrophic for American interests in West Asia. Again, as I said earlier, he will look to do something about restoring even satisfactory relations between America and Russia. That is going to be a real challenge because the American establishment will try to bring him down. They will try to derail his plans for trying to end the war in Ukraine. I don't think he will be successful on that count, but he clearly wants an equal partnership between America and Russia in the world. That's better than the atrocious level of relations between the two superpowers at the moment. Again, as I said, something, anything is better than nothing.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Marcus. Sister Sakina, I would like to move on to you. Do you believe that our institutional system has changed after the two world wars and the bloody revolutions in Russia and China? If you do, to what extent?
I think Clive has given a very good historical background on that, on the control of systems that exists, and how post, for example, World War II, we saw how the Zionist state was created because of the gift that was given to the Rothschild, and there's a very interesting whole history of how there was because they were helping in the creation of the gunpowder, that was used by Britain in the Second World War. How Israel was then handed over as a gift for on that. So I think yes, definitely the world changed after that. And British colonialism, it continues in a way, in a different format to what it was before, but like we see in Palestine, it still is colonized by the same people who are handed over Israel. But if I can just clarify one or two other things that I wanted to mention. When I, for example, talked about the Christianity and Trump not being a champion of it, this is not to say that I'm saying, that the for example, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden was better. I mean, I think they're all as bad as each other. But however, to think that we are talking about he is an evangelist himself. I mean, if you look at his nominees, for example, Pete Hegseth, who is going to be the Secretary of Defense, this is the top position after Donald Trump. He is very clearly talking about things like destroying Al-Aqsa Mosque, because this is in the Bible, basing Bible as his proof. He's talking about destruction of things like Al-Aqsa Mosque. So when you're talking about this hardcore evangelist being present in the Trump administration, this is reality. I mean, this is a fact. If you look at the people he's nominated, they dominate over there. And also, when we're talking about them being anti-women, this is in relation to the sexual offenses that he has been. Yes, maybe I don't know too much about what were the proof of it and stuff, but there were allegations. However, these are really smaller matters. When it comes to Christianity, for example, the home of Christianity, the birth of Christ, was in Palestine. And Palestine is being destroyed left, right, and center. Whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or Jews in Palestine, this is not being looked upon. So when we look at people like Trump, all I'm saying is, I'm not saying he's better than the or worse than the others. They're all one and the same. However, none of them are good, because all of them literally just are using a different type of rhetoric to invite votes. In reality, none of them believe in any of that. If he was the champion really of Christians, then the first thing he would be doing is liberating, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, ensuring that the Christians who are being also subjugated in Israel were free. And he's not going to do anything of the sort. I think the major issue here is, in my view, Trump is going to actually, like Clive was saying, we are moving into the next phase whereby there is a change to the status quo. I believe this is true. And I think Donald Trump is going to help this process, not that he thinks he will, but by his policies, he's going to actually make the world so anti-American, even more than it can be possible right now. He's talking about, and the people he has appointed are talking about, for example, BDS. They want to crack down on their own people who are pro BDS. He is talking about all these students who have been coming out in universities. They are going to crack down on them. So America is going to become itself a place where there are no freedoms of any kind. And the revolution against the Western colonial imperialist powers is going to start within the states themselves. So we can see some sort of that happening in the UK, in different European countries. But I think with the coming of the Trump, what Biden was no good for Israel, for Palestine. Also, of course, we have seen a genocide happen under him. But what was different, I think, between him and Trump is that Biden was putting up a pretense. He was saying things like they are trying to rein in, Israel, sanctions here and there, pretending that the settlers were being, punished. The money was being held and then released after a week. With Trump, I think we will see no pretense. Yes, Trump does say what he means, and he is going to be very vocal and outright anti-Palestine. He's going to be super pro-Israel. And the movement that has started around the world, the way we see how people have realized this control of Zionism around the world, this is only going to increase in pace. And therefore, I think, yes, we will see a change in the status quo of how the world is being ruled, the end of Western hegemony in the world, the end of the New World Order. And this, I believe, will be possible because Trump is going to make things so much worse that the people are going to revolt against the Western powers.
Thank you so much for that, Sister Sakina. I would like to move on to Clive now, and I want to touch upon BRICS. Okay, in this conversation now, that how is the BRICS summit shaping the economical structure after the U.S. elections as of now? What is your opinion on that?
Sure. I mentioned it briefly, and I didn't really finish on the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong he came under Yale. Yale was part of the establishment that he was influenced by, and the Cultural Revolution, which was responsible for tens of millions of deaths, was basically another revolution that was backed by the same money forces. And since Mao, what are called the Immortals have been running China, and it is seen as somehow being different and in opposition, but people talk about communism and capitalism. Well, China is a fusion of the two, which is what we're beginning to see more generally across the world. But in essence, it is totalitarian. But it has been very successful economically. It has not used military power, but it's used economic power in Africa and across the globe. There are very few people in the West who don't have phones, handbags, all sorts of things that have been made in China. So if we look at the world in terms of power blocks, I talked about Russia, China, and the West. Well, that, if you like, was the analysis up until the formation of BRICS, or the establishment of BRICS Plus, which happened in the last year or so. So we now have 10 countries in that bloc. And contrary to what the situation in the past, where Anglo-American power and the US particularly dominated militarily and economically, BRICS is now bigger and represents more of the global population than the West. However, there is a problem. And the problem is that we're talking about three fundamental flaws in our global political economy, one of which is institutional hierarchy, and that enables the theft or misappropriation or the colonization of the commons, in other words, what we all need to live on, land, food, air, water. They've all been colonized and monetized, privatized, and that has all been supported by money. And so what we're witnessing in the BRICS is not a revolution in global politics, but another power base formed of those three same flaws. So whilst I have no doubt that in some respects it will be beneficial for a substantial portion of the population to be liberated from the global yoke that the US hegemony has enjoyed thus far, it's just changing one form of tyranny for another, which will deteriorate over time. We learn from history; it's inevitable. And so, whilst that is the situation that seems to be emerging, I would point to a much bigger transition where power is going to devolve downwards, not because it's been given, but because it will be taken. Because people will begin to realize that irrespective of whether they're in BRICS or whether they're in the West or in Africa or elsewhere, that actually they can rely on themselves, their communities, and each other. And this is the way that humans have lived for most of their modern existence. It's only in the last 3,000 to 5,000 years that we've had this system of money to organize ourselves. And it is clearly woefully inadequate and self-destructive for us to rely on it, because it's leading us into an evolutionary cul-de-sac, and threatening the entire species. So what will take its place is already emerging, and it's emerging through the reason that money evolved or was adopted was because when you live in a family or a community or a tribe, you understand the needs, the capacities, the knowledge, the wisdom, skills, and experience of all those around you, and they are looked after irrespective of their capability or the capacities or their needs, because obviously young children cannot provide what adults can, and old people can provide less as they get older, but they were all looked after. The problem, and so what we lived by was a form of mutual support, love, and cooperation. But with the adoption of money, it was a useful mechanism for once you went outside of your tribe or your community, because you didn't have the capacity to understand the needs, capacities of, however million people it might have been at the time, now 7 billion plus. But money was used as a proxy, so the form of exchange emerged from that idea. But the problem is that money has now become the means by which we organize ourselves. So it's in total opposition to all of those values that we used to adopt within communities, and we still adopt today within families. I don't know many families that issue a bill at the end of each meal to see that people pay for it. So what we have in terms of the internet, which largely has been created and developed and evolved, and all the tools, the phones we use and all the technology have come from what we describe as self-organization or open source, where people have a need, they develop something, they share what they've developed, and people improve it. And that is how the internet has grown. Where we are now is that you have these large companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others, Apple, all of whom have colonized that technology and are making huge amounts of money from it. But the value that they are creating comes from us, each of us individually. What we have now are the tools to open source value and open source the way we organize ourselves, rather than mediating through weak and criminal individuals who have been incentivized to behave like psychopaths and do so accordingly, because that's how you make most money. Whereas when money is no longer the value by which we organize ourselves, then there will be no need for such psychopathic institutions, and we will get beyond this. But as I said earlier, we're going through this current mess as a transition, and it is inevitable that it is going to be highly disruptive, highly destructive, and very difficult. But we are going to get there. Of that, I have no doubt, because what I've witnessed in the last few years is a rising consciousness, particularly among local communities, groups of people, but even across geographical boundaries, people forming relationships and communities across the internet. And there's a rising awareness that there is a much higher authority than man. And that higher authority is the manner by which we are ruled. And once we bring the way we live into line with universal law, if you like, or God's law, whatever your religious persuasion, they all stem from the same thing, that the universe runs on love. And more and more people are beginning to realize that. And these diversions of wars and conflict.
Sorry to interrupt, Clive. Actually, we are running short of time.
Okay.
We have just a few more minutes towards the end of the program. Yes. I would just like to get a final conclusive message, a very brief one from Dr. Marcus and Sister Sakina, as quick as possible. And if we can conclude today's program, we just have 5 minutes, so if we can just have 2 2-minute pointers from the both of you. especially as to what Clive has mentioned, and also to the overall points that we've highlighted on today's conversation regarding Trump's presidency. What would you like to add, Dr. Marcus?
No American president will help Palestine. That is a reality, and a brutal reality. And I, for one, will never stop supporting the Palestinian people. I will never stop supporting Palestine. My staunch support for Palestine has cost me immensely in my life, both personally and professionally. We are moving into a multipolar world, though America and Russia will continue to be the two superpowers. They will continue to be the two most powerful countries on earth. BRICS will play a very major catalyst in the entry of a multipolar world, replacing Western global hegemony. Though let us not forget that there are many countries within the BRICS that have a great deal of tension between themselves, such as India and China. Also, let us not forget that the Chinese economic miracle has been based on China's economic relationship with America. So the Chinese will not take any actions which could rupture their economic relationship with America. And going back to Trump, as I said, he is not a savior. I will continue to castigate him when it comes to West Asia, but there are other causes which I am equally passionate about. He will end the teaching in schools in America of critical race theory, which depicts the white race as an evil race. Well, if that is what you believe, then stop speaking English. People who believe that in the world should stop speaking English and should stop using the creations of the white race. And he will end the participation of men in women's competitions, men using women's toilets and women's changing rooms. So again, I will continue to very, very strongly attack him. But where he does good work, domestically speaking, I will applaud him, because I will take something, anything, because in Britain we get nothing, literally nothing.
Thank you for that, Dr. Marcus. I would like to thank you. Sister Sakina, can you please conclude quickly?
Yeah, I just think, like we all have said, the world is changing. And for those of us who come from, a doctrine of religion, those of us who are people of faith, of course, we believe that the axes are aligning for the coming of the Mahdi. This is our belief that, in whichever form you want to, put it, the reality is that the world is now aligning for a savior, for someone who can come and not only be there for Muslims, but people of all religions. And when we see today the issue of Palestine has become so central, the fight for social justice is something that is not limited to any one particular religion. And you see people of all faith and even no faith really come together. And this, for me, this is a message that this is an army made up of different people, of different faith, of different cultures, of different colors, who are coming together to start forming an army that will support the Messiah, who is for us as Muslims, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam.
Thank you very much, Sister Sakina. We would like to conclude today's program, and I think, Clive, you have mentioned a lot of things on today's program related to our context. Is there anything that you want to add as well, or can we wrap up the show?
No, I don't think I have much to add, other than basically it is up to each of us individually to embrace what is right and know what is wrong, and basically love our neighbor. And our neighbor is everyone, because we are a global family, and that's where we're heading.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful message that you've shared with us. I would like to thank all of you for joining me on today's program. I know that the discussion, of course, always needs a lot more time, because there are several points that need to be, looked into, argued upon. But hopefully we did try to cover enough on today's program. And I would humbly like to thank all the three guests, Dr. Marcus, Sister Sakina, and Clive, to join me on today's program. Please make sure to like today's program and give us a thumbs up, and keep sharing as much as possible. And we'll be bringing in more new upcoming headlines and insights into our upcoming discussions. This is your host, Sakina Habib, signing off. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.